Um, One thing I will say, Jessica and Allison, they planned the music and all that, all the songs, and they had no idea what I'm teaching, and I had no idea what songs they were choosing. But it goes really well. And also, before I get started, I do want to thank Pastor Thad for all. I mean, this is the women's conference. It's my thing. I get to come up here and be the superstar and all that. But he does all the hard work for it. So ordering the food, getting everything together, running all the errands while I sewed like a crazy woman at home. So, which I do frequently, but so I appreciate that very much. I don't know how many lead pastors do that kind of work for their associate pastors thing. So I greatly appreciate that. So, amen. All right, glad you all are here. We are missing a few, but we got some very special ones sitting right over there. One in pink blanket. Yeah. Listen carefully, Gwenny. Okay. All right. So let's go to Matthew chapter 24. I am reading mostly out of the King James. I'm being good and brought my King James Amplified Bible so that I can. Wimp. Yeah. All right. So let's go to Matthew 24 and let's verse 6. Make sure I'm in the right spot. So here we have, it starts in verse 4. I'm not going to read all the scriptures for time's sake. I do sometimes, talk a lot and go longer than I'm supposed to for things. So I'm going to do my best to, not keep you here till midnight or, 11 or anyway. So Jesus is talking to his disciples here, and they're asking about, when are we going to know when this time comes? So just to give you some uplifting scriptures here. Verse 6, and ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in diverse places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. And it goes on. Uplifting so far, right? You like it. Let's go to Luke 21. I mean, some of that stuff sounds familiar, doesn't it? Luke 21, verse 10. No, see, I'm using a different Bible and I can't find anything. Wait, where's that? There. Huh? Nothing? Okay. Chapter 21, verse 10. Then he said unto them, here's another in Luke's account here with what Jesus is talking about. It says, nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and great earthquakes shall be in diverse places, and famines and pestilences, and fearful sights, and great signs shall there be from heaven. But before all these, they shall lay their hands on you, and persecute you, etc., right? Woo! Let's go to 2 Timothy. You're going to be just so happy after I finish reading this last one here. It's just, I just dug for the most uplifting scriptures. 2 Timothy chapter 3. Let's start at verse 1. And I want to read this out of the Amplified just because it really amplifies it. But understand this, that in the last days will come, and that's the end of the end. When it's last days, it's end of the end. Last days will come, perilous times of great stress and trouble, hard to deal with and hard to bear. For people will be lovers of self and utterly self-centered, lovers of money and aroused by an inordinate, greedy desire for wealth. Proud and arrogant and contemptuous boasters, they will be abusive, blasphemous, scoffing, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, and profane. Whew. They will be without natural human affection, callous and inhuman, relentless, admitting of no truce or appeasement. They will be slanderers, false accusers, troublemakers, intemperate, and loose in morals and conduct, uncontrolled and fierce, haters of good. They will be treacherous, betrayers, rash, and inflated with self-conceit. They will be lovers of sensual pleasure and vain amusements more than and rather than lovers of God. And it goes on. So, now you're thinking, wow, that's depressing. I suckered you in here with the Cracker Barrel food, and now I get to depress you, right? Well, I have an answer for that. Okay, because the times are crazy, aren't they? Wars and rumors of wars and all these kinds of things. Your opinion has to be one way; it can't possibly be any other, or all of these sorts of things. But I have an answer for you. Okay, for these things, and even Jesus said, don't be troubled about it. But I have your answer. Okay, so does that make you feel better? That I have your answer to all of this, to all of everything that looks out in the world. I have your answer for it. Okay. All right, hang on. Let's go to Esther, chapter 4. You guys are so excited when I look out there. Sorry, I just read very depressing, and you're full. If I was you, I'd be asleep already. All right, Esther chapter 4, verse 14. Here's your answer. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, last part of the verse is where I'm going, then there shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knows whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Now I'm going to read that last part out of the Amplified. And who knows but that you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this, and for this very occasion. This is the time. This is the time. Okay, so that's your answer to those scriptures. That's your answer to what's going on out there in the world, is that you were born for such a time as this. It made me think of I don't know how many of you are old enough to have seen the Goonies movie, but the one scene where they're down in the cave and he's like, but that was their time and this is our time. Now this is our time. Let's do it. And that's what I kept thinking of. This is our time. And I keep thinking that. And I'd be on prayer calls with Jessica's mom, and I'm like, we were born. We were born for such a time as this. You were born. You have come. You have been born for such a time as this, and for this very occasion. You were born at the very time you were supposed to be. You have the passion, the interests, the gifts, the talents needed for this very time. You do. I used to think that I should have been born back in the Old West. You could just put on a gun belt and go out. Somebody bothered you, you just shot them and you threw them over a cliff. And they didn't have all this fancy stuff to find out who done it, right? I could be the school marm in the pretty dress and teach all them kids and still do some shooting. But I wasn't born for that time, or I would have been born then. You were born at the perfect time for just this time. Okay, does that make you feel better? Anybody feel better? Okay, well let's look at someone. We're going to see someone who did a major thing, what they endured, who they were. Okay, and we're being real about this. This whole year is like, get real about the Bible. This person was a real person, went through these things. These things happened to her. And I brought my book, not just because I'm a nerd, but because I like this account here is also written in other historical places. The cylinder of Cyrus, the inscription on the whatever rock. All these other writings through history, sometimes we as Christians in the Western world it almost like we see the Bible pulled up out of context and don't realize that there's so many historical writings that back up events in the Bible. And so this person was a real person. We're going to look at her situation, how she was protected, favored, advanced, empowered, and given wisdom. Because she was born for the time she was born in. She had a job. And I really didn't want to teach on this person the whole time. To me, it's kind of stereotypical. But sometimes I make the mistake of looking at things like that and not looking at really who they were and what they did instead of just being, oh, well, it's, the woman born for such a time as this. I shouldn't, I don't want to be stereotypical. But we're going to take a look at Esther, a deeper look at Esther, to really see who she was, what she endured. Because when we think about ourselves, who am I? What can I do? Look at the things I've done in my past. Look at the mistakes I've made. Look where I came from. I'm from Lewis County, back middle of nowhere. Sun doesn't shine but like 3 hours a day there in the holler, right? Just all the things that we've gone through, that we've thought, that we've endured. How can it be? What are you talking about? What am I going to do? What am I going to change? What am I going to make a difference with? Well, we're going to, and when we talk about Esther, many times, she was a queen. Esther was a queen. Come on, she made a big difference because she was a queen. Not the whole time. And being queen didn't really, didn't mean a lot. So we're going to take a look at her and look at what she did, what she endured. We're going to be real about this and then apply to ourselves. Because if Esther can do what she did in the time that she did it in, I would never want to have been born in her time, ever. What she endured during that time, what she accomplished, and how God used her. Okay, so of course we have Esther, who, let's just get into it, because I'm going to try not to give you a big history lesson, because I love learning about this time period and all of the things that went on. So I have to stop myself from doing that because we've got a lot to go through. But I just want to focus on Esther, who she was, where she came from, what she endured, how she was able to accomplish what she accomplished for God and for a nation. Okay, so now we know Esther. We always hear about Esther. She was the beauty queen of the Bible. She won a beauty contest, right? That wasn't really what she won. She won. She was so beautiful, and the king just loved her, and she became the queen, and she did these great things, saved the Jews. She was perfect, right? Everybody that just saw her was just like, oh, Esther. So, and how can we apply that to us? All right, Esther chapter 1, verse 1. I want to read a couple of this because now this is taking place at 471 BC, so before Christ. Now it came to pass in the days of Artaxerxes. This is Artaxerxes who reigned from India even unto Ethiopia over 127 provinces, so 127. That in those days, when the king Artaxerxes sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, which was 471 BC, he made a feast unto all the princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces being before him. Now, I want you to understand that at this time, Artaxerxes is a title. His name was something else. Astygianus, something like that, okay? So it took me a while to get Artaxerxes, and that is how you pronounce it, but he was only 17 or 18 years old at this when he threw this banquet. Okay, so he's a bonehead kid, bonehead teenage boy. All right, he's going to do some bonehead things. All right, so he throws this huge banquet. He's this party, or they're partying. Everybody's just drinking. He's got all the important people there. They're there, and he's the king. And it's like, whoa! And I'm like, something here. I'm 17, 18 years old, and I am something. So, he's doing all these things. Now, verse 10. On the 7th day of this big party, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he was drunk as a skunk. Okay. He commanded these fellows here. I'm not going to read those. I'm going to save you that. The 7 chamberlains. They were not, chamberlains is a nice word, I guess. They were eunuchs. Anytime it says chamberlain here, they were eunuchs. That served in the presence of Artaxerxes the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to look on. Now, this started the whole thing. It made way for Esther. But just to give you, and again, I want you to see the kind of culture and society that Esther was in, where she was from, what was going on. And Vashti refused. Okay, she's like, no, I'm not coming out there. Which, of course, made the king furious. Now, here's part of the thing. Many people believe, and I have a feeling this is probably part of it, was that Vashti would have come out. He wanted her to come out wearing only the crown. Okay? Only her crown. Because he wanted to show her off. This is my woman. This is my wife. Now, he had a whole harem of other girls, right? But, so this is what, and many scholars believe that's true, and I have a feeling because just the way it was, whether some were like, well, maybe it's because the eunuchs gave her the direction. No, they would have been doing that all the time because she couldn't always go into the king's presence. He was her husband, but you didn't just go in and say, hey, honey. Okay? So she refused. He got mad. The men, all these wonderful men, came up with a great plan, and that was to banish her. They made it a law of the Medes and Persians, which could not ever be changed. The king himself could not change it. Okay? When they did that kind of law, the king himself could not change it. So they banished her. She may have been beheaded, but I don't know. They banished her, and they were like, hey, let's round up a bunch of the pretty girls in town, all over the place, all your provinces, bring him in. Because, after he cooled off, sobered up, he's like, what did I do? But he couldn't change it because it was a law that could not be changed. And they may have beheaded her also. So let's round up some ladies, some pretty girls, all over the place, and bring them to the king. And then he can make a choice and find one that could be his wife instead of Vashti. Okay? So that's what they decide to do. All right, sorry. Let's go to chapter 2. And let's go to verse 5. Now we're going to hear about Esther. And we really want to look, this is Esther's situation. Verse 5. Now in Shushan, the palace there, was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of these guys. Okay? Yair, Shimi, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity, which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. I don't know how many times they can put carried away in there, but 3. So they were exiles. They were captives. They had been removed from Jerusalem, from their home, taken into Persia, and they were captives. And so this is who Mordecai is. Verse 7. And he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. And the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. They like to repeat things in case we don't get it. But now, this is who Esther is. Esther is, first of all, an orphan. No mom, no dad. Her cousin, uncle's cousin's brother's kid, whatever he was, is taking care of her. She is an exile. She is not in her homeland. She's not with her people. She's not with her religion. She is not in an area with her customs. And honestly, she was a Jew there in Persia, and she was the dirt under your feet. This is who Esther was. When we think about Esther, oh, well, she was so pretty, and she was a queen, and so she did this, blah, blah, blah. This is who Esther was. A young girl without a mother or father. Exiled. In a foreign land with people who did not really care for Jews. And if you have read as the book of Esther, you see that. She had no hope for anything. She had no say in her life. This is who Esther was. So when we're thinking about born for such a time as this, and we think about ourselves and what can I do in this time? What do I have to offer? Who am I? Look where I came from. I'm a nobody, or I'm a this, I've done that. Boy, and there was one song, if you had seen me before, if you had known what all I've done in my life, you wouldn't be saying I was born for such a time as this. If you'd known all the things I'd done in my life, you might say you shouldn't be up here. But that's the past, right? So God didn't cause Esther. Oh, wait, I'm ahead of myself. Sorry. So this was Esther. This was her life. A nobody. She was beautiful. But that was going to get her caught. All right, so let's go to verse 8. So it came to pass when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan the palace, to the custody of Hegai, that Esther was brought also unto the king's house, to the custody of Hegai, keeper of the women. So she was gathered up with everybody else. She was beautiful. Whoop, she's pretty, let's take her. King might like her. With a lot of girls. A lot. There were a lot of them. So now, God didn't cause Esther to be taken. You know, because sometimes people say, well, you know, God caused her. She was going to be taken no matter what. Because in this time period, the kings rounded up pretty girls. It actually happens again even after he's married to Esther. They round up a lot of pretty girls for the harem. They do it periodically. They even rounded up young boys, castrated them, and made them eunuchs periodically so they could be over the harems. This is the time period. This is the time period that Esther is living in. I mean, when you think about our crazy time period, I still don't want to go back to Esther's time. Not even. So this is what's going on. So verse 9. And the maiden, Esther, pleased him, or pleased Hegai, and that was one of the head eunuchs. And she obtained kindness of him, and he speedily gave her the things for purification, which such things as belonged to her, and 7 maidens, which were meet to be given her out of the king's house, and he preferred her and her maids unto the King James. Okay, let's go over to the Amplified. And the maiden pleased Hegai and obtained his favor, and he speedily gave her the things for her purification. They would go through, they were, given a beauty treatment. Certain foods and oils and spices. I mean, if they weren't pretty before, they were getting them prettied up now. Her portion of food and 7 chosen maids to be given her from the king's palace, and he removed her and her maids to the best apartment in the harem. So Esther is now part of a harem. Not your ideal place. Okay? So she's a Jewish girl, no father, no mother. She's in a place, in a culture that is not really kind to the Jews. She's a female. She has no say in her life. She's been captured because she is so beautiful with all the other really beautiful girls. She wasn't the only beautiful one. I just want to point that out. She would not have been the only beautiful one. There were lots of beautiful girls that were taken. And now she's part of a harem. But God's working. She, for some reason, finds favor with the head eunuch. He gives her 7 maids to help take care of her, gives her the choicest food, gives her the best place to stay in the harem. Now, I wonder what about her, and again, yes, Esther was beautiful, but they were surrounded with beautiful women. What about her stood out? Was it her personality? Did she have a really good sense of humor? Did she make him laugh by tripping over her own feet? Did she, was it kindness? Was she really kind to the eunuchs because they weren't in much of a better spot than she? What was it about her about her that set her apart to gain the favor of the guy over the entire harem? What about you? What about your personality? What about your sense of humor? What about your loyalty, your whatever it is? What about you that sets you apart from everybody else? What about you that gets you favored over everybody else? Do you see how, I just want you to see this. Esther it was rough. I wouldn't have wanted to have been her. But if God can do this with Esther, what can he do with you? All right, verse 10. I'm going to read this out of the Amplified as well. Esther had not made known her nationality or her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her not to do so. She couldn't even tell anybody who she was, really. Some people may think, well, you don't know me. You don't really know where I've come from, what I've done, who I am. If I told you some of these things, you'd take off. You wouldn't want to be anywhere near me. She could not tell anyone she was a Jew. Mordecai with wisdom, was telling her, this is what you need to do. It wasn't a good time. This was before, because Esther is going to give birth to Cyrus, who says, go on back home, Jews. Take your stuff. I'll help you, give you money. It's Esther's son that does that. So this is before that has occurred. So it's not, why hide that she's a Jew? Because it wasn't a good thing to be a Jew in Persia. So this is another thing about her. She couldn't even tell people who she was, where she came from. All right, verse 11. And Mordecai, I'll read out of the King James there, walked every day before the court of the women's house to know how Esther did and what should become of her. And I read that because here's the deal. When you were taken to go in the harem, you didn't leave it. You could never get married. You never left. Unless you were very displeasing and then you died. Okay, they'd kill you. So Mordecai, who was raising her, this was his family, walked every day. Now think about that. Think about your family. The family members that pray for you, that stand for you, that walk for you, that give you wisdom, things. That's what he was doing. And I just think about that because every day, how's Esther? Where is she? What's going on? How's she doing? How is she? He wanted to know she was okay. Just think, this is the time period, because he may never, ever, possibly would see her again. Never know what came of her. This is the culture, this is the time that Esther lived in. She was born for that time. You were born for this time. Now, verse 14. So it's describing what would happen. The maids, they would have this treatment, 6 months this and 6 months that, and then after a year you were ready to go into the king, and if the king, if he liked you, then woohoo. Okay, so in the evening the girl would be taken in, and on the morning she returned into the second house of the women, to the custody of this other eunuch here, Sheshgaz, the king's chamberlain, which kept the concubines. She came into the king no more, except the king delighted in her, and that she were called by name. So, this is Esther's future. She's in the harem. When she's done with her year, all these women, that year of purification, they called it, getting even more prettied up, she would go into the king. Never met him before. He'd never met her before. Go into the king. Next morning, she would go back into the area with the concubines. A concubine was lower than a wife. They were kept, for the king for any time. Oh, I like you, come here. Plus, if you have children, they're part of the workforce. We might put them in our will, but you really get no inheritance because you're illegitimate and you're second class. Okay? Now, if you fell out of grace as a concubine, that's when you got to entertain and dance for the other people that the king wanted you to. This is Esther's position. Think about that. Esther was a real person. This really happened to her. It really happened to many, many women. And even the boys. It breaks my heart to think that boys were rounded up, castrated, and trained to be eunuchs, to be in charge of all the women that they took. Okay, this happened all the time in this culture. So this is what, that if concubines, socially secondary, not legally entitled to inheritance, they had a place to live, they had food and clothes, but you only came around when the king wanted you to, when he called you by name. Verse 16. It's Esther's turn. Pardon me while I lick my fingers there. So Esther was taken unto King Artaxerxes into his house royal in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. Now, many people say, oh, Esther won a beauty contest. No, she didn't. They were all beautiful. She'd never met him. He didn't know her. She had no choice. And some scholars will say, she should have fought. She should have resisted. She should not. They weren't married. Because you know what happened in there, right? Don't have to say that, do I? But if she'd resisted, she'd be dead. Period. She had no choice. No other choice but death. And she still kept who she was a secret. If we go down to verse 20. Esther had not yet showed her kindred nor her people. She had not yet revealed her nationality or her people, because she was still obeying Mordecai. So here she was now. Verse 17, and the king loved Esther above all the women. And she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. There were probably hundreds of girls that were taken. Why Esther? Here again, God did not put her in this situation. That happened, it was the time period. But Esther found favor. Probably the only girl in the harem who was a Jew. She found favor and grace in the king's sight. And he's like, I think about this time he's in his early 20s, 24, something. So, some time has passed, because it took a while for them to do all that with Vashti, and then they put out the edict to round up the women and go through their year. So it's been a while. He's about 23, 24 years old. He's still, ain't got no sense, but nothing against men. It's just you're going to see that. If you read all through it, you can see he's kind of emotional and he just takes bad advice. But, seriously. So this is what we have going on. This is Esther. Now, as queen, she had more freedom, a little more freedom. As queen, she could be taught like how to ride a horse. They could ride horses. They could learn how to do archery. She could give her own dinners for the ladies. She still, though, could not go see her husband unless he called for her. She was queen, but she could not go, honey, we need to talk, or whatever, or dear, I haven't seen you in a while. No, couldn't do that. Okay? So she became the head wife with quite a few perks. Now think about it, though. She couldn't leave. She couldn't go into his presence unless called. She wasn't able to, go about town. Think about Vashti. Vashti told him no on something. Gone. So it still wasn't a perfect situation. But she's finding favor. She's finding grace. Something about her that's drawing in others. And I want you to keep thinking about you. What about you? What do you have? What gifts? What do you love doing? That can be, when I think about people who love music, and what can you do with that music for such a time as this? Are you compassionate? You see people and you just want to help them. What about you that can make a difference, that God can use, that you'll be shown favor and advancement? Let's go to chapter 4. Now, I'm not going to go into all the other things, but there's an enemy to the Jews. His name is Haman. He gets mad at Mordecai, and lots of things happen. And the king takes some really stupid advice from Haman and goes and makes a law, another law that cannot be changed. Not even the king can change it. Why, yes, it's a great idea. Let's just go ahead. I'll give you the money. You can go ahead and kill all the Jews. The people, they'll be able to rise up on this day and pass it out to let everybody know on this day you can rise up and kill any Jew you want. You kill them all. So he's still not real bright on things because he took some more bad advice, right? So this is the situation. Not going to go into all of that because I want to stay focused on Esther. And listen, we don't have much longer, I promise. This is the last page, handwritten. So this law could not be changed. So verse 7. Now Mordecai and Esther are communicating through one of the eunuchs. Okay? So Mordecai told Hatach or Hadach or however you want, I don't know, told him of all that had happened, all about this new law, all about on this day people can rise up and kill any Jew they want. Okay? And the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king to be able to kill the Jews. And he gave him the copy of the writing of the decree and said, show this to Esther. Tell Esther she has got to do something. That she should go in unto the king to make supplication unto him and to make request before him for her people. Now, she's never told him who her people are. So the eunuch went and told Esther, listen, this is what's going on. And Mordecai has said, you got to do something. You got to do something about this. Now, verse 11, just keep thinking. This is Esther, who was born for such a time as this. The same way you were born for now. For situations now. For things going on in the world now. Your home, your community, your job site for now. Verse 11. Or let's go to verse 10. And again Esther spake unto this guy, and gave him commandment unto Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, man or woman, shall come into the king into the inner court who is not called. So anybody that goes into the king without being called, into the inner court without being called, man or woman, everybody knows this. There is one law of his, another law, another great law, that they'll be put to death. So Esther could not go into the inner court of her husband without possibility of being put to death. Except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called in unto the king these 30 days. It has been 30 days since the king has seen her, she has seen the king, and I pretty much bet he hasn't given her much of a thought in those 30 days. Because they went and rounded up a whole other score of more women after he married Esther to put in the harem. So if she goes in, his wife, lead wife, the one with more of the perks, her children will be legitimate, all of that, get the inheritance, and he does, Cyrus. But she could go to that door, stand there, and look at him, and he could have her killed. So, just think about that. In this, and think about today, in this time. I don't know that any of you think, well, if I go to their door to talk to them, that I'm going to die. Right? So here again, if Esther can do these things, if God can use Esther and all of what made her up, all of her personality, all of these things, who she was, where she came from, what's our past got to do with anything? What's our thoughts on how we feel about it? What's that got to do with anything? So she tells him that, and then Mordecai sends back the response that we first looked at. We'll just look, and in verse 14, at the last part, we'll do it in the Amplified. Well, let's read all of it. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance shall arise for the Jews from elsewhere. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows but that you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this and for this very occasion? She was born to be in that time. I got to give Esther props. I don't know. I'd be like, oh, I don't know. See y'all. And she says, let's go, verse 16. So Esther sends word, go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king. She's going to do it, which is not according to the law. It's breaking the law, a major law, and if I perish, I perish. So that's what they did. Now think about that. Oh, she won a beauty contest, and it was all like, no. She was a wife with perks, but just going in to see her husband uncalled for could be cause for her death. This orphan girl, who was just dirt under the Persians' feet, this girl who was nothing but property and had barely any say. She's got a little tiny bit more say in her life now that she's the queen. I mean, she could have a dinner and have people over. Women. She couldn't see her husband unless he called for her. This Jewish girl was now going to have to reveal her family line, which she had had to keep secret all this time, if she lived long enough to do it. Chapter 5, verse 1. Almost there, guys. Now it came to pass on the 3rd day of the fast that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house, over against the king's house, and the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house, over against the gate of the house. Don't you love how? And it was so. So here's her moment of truth. Here's the moment. I don't know about you, but just thinking about it, I feel kind of sick. I feel sick to my stomach. I feel like I'm going, I don't know how she walked there. I mean, think about it. And this was real. This is written in Persian writings. This happened. They wrote everything, in a part in there where he wrote it in the Chronicles that Mordecai saved his life. And they wrote everything down, the great things of the kings. They wrote it. This happened. Whew. Verse 2. And it was so when the king saw Esther, who he hadn't seen in 30 days, probably never gave a thought to, the queen standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight, And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Now, verse 3, Then said the king unto her, What wilt thou, Queen Esther? Okay, amplified. Verse 3, amplified. Then the king said to her, What will you have, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given you even to the half of the kingdom. That's favor. You can have up to half of my kingdom. Now, he wouldn't give over half because then it wouldn't be his anymore. Right? But what's your request? I know I could kill you right now because I didn't call for you, haven't seen you in a while, and after all, I am the king. But what would you want? I'll give it to you. You can have whatever it is, up to half of my kingdom. Favor. Now keep in mind, this sounds pretty good. If I went to Neil and was like, hey, and he's like, yeah, you can have up to half of my kingdom. I already got it, but anyway. But think about that. Wow. Esther rose above who she was. Now it goes on. Esther, we're not going to go into the rest of it. If you haven't read it, read it. If you have read it, read it again with thinking about Esther, and you got to find out at the end that she's not all sweetness and light, and I love it. They did a purge, baby. Okay, anyway. So Esther had a plan, and God gave Esther the wisdom and a plan to carry out that saved her nation, that got Mordecai into the place that the man who was wanting to kill all the Jews, his place. He was second to the king. Esther was given all of Haman's possessions, the house, everything, given to Esther. So her plan, Mordecai didn't give her the plan. God did. But fasting in those 3 days, she had wisdom and a plan. And saved her people, saved the nation. Esther rose above who she was, where she'd been. God had a plan for her. He protected her. He equipped her, favored her, helped her to navigate the craziness of the time, the culture, the laws, the circumstances of the world that she lived in. Esther was an answer to a big problem. So are you. People, the world needs you, just as you are. The good, the bad, and the ugly of you, right? Okay. As I know, hey, don't even. I knew better than to have you all here. Gosh. Hey, back it up, sister. All right, sorry. Let me get back all pious. People, the world needs you just as you are, the good, the bad, and the ugly of you, each of us. No matter how you are, what you think about yourself, God can heal your mind. You can move forward. Think about how much compassion. We're comforted to be a comfort. That's what the word says. When you know people who have gone through a divorce, and you have people in some churches who say, oh, you can't get remarried, or you definitely could never be behind a pulpit or give word. You work with the kids, but, that's it. And you have people who have gone through that, and someone, and they've been renewed from it. They know who they are now. They've been through these things. They can help others with that, right? Think about what you've been through, what God has got you through. You can help others. You're comforted to be a comfort. So even what you've gone through in your life. We kind of had a crazy father, so we understand what people go through when they have a crazy father. We do. All those things, anything that takes place in your lives, those experiences, those things that you may not think are worth about you that are worth anything. How can God use me? God used Esther because now is the time. This is your time. I'm going to go to the Goonies again. This is our time. That was their time. That was Esther's time. Thank goodness, because I don't think I could have done that. Okay? But this is our time. God has equipped us. You are perfect for this time. No matter what your age is, no matter what you do, where you've been, male or female, whatever, you were born for now. You have such purpose for now. God's ready to favor you now and protect you and guide you, give you wisdom now so that we can make a difference in this world that needs you so very badly, needs what you have. They needs the God in you. Amen? So now's the time. Hallelujah. If you want to go ahead and, I don't know, stand, yes, have dessert. Nobody went out and got dessert or anything. You were all just so depressed from how I started. My heart, Dinah's thinking, please don't cry. My heart, I know there's some fellas here, and by the way, we appreciate you serving and letting me give you a hard time. You know, it's always fun. For women, is that they truly see what they're worth, who they are, what they have to offer. And that, you know, Esther had to abide by some worldly thoughts. Don't tell who you are, don't do this, don't do that because you're a woman. The world wants to give, some people in the world want to give women a lot of rules about things. I'm not, but like being a woman pastor. Been told that to my face. Okay? It's like, well, let me teach you something. I can teach you how you're wrong. But that's my heart, and that's my heart in this, is that seeing in Esther, who was this is not just a Bible story. This was a person who endured these things. And when we think, it hurts my heart to think about throughout history, all of the women, and not just the women. I mean, I got 2 boys. To think that they would be gathered up and taken to be in charge of a harem with some few changes hurts the heart. Where was I going with that? I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, I want you to see who you are. Sorry, I knew this would be trouble. It's trouble. Yes, thanks. Good bet. Yes, I know, it's her. But I just want you to see that, and that's all of you. How special you are. How God can use you with all of those faults that you like maybe bring up about yourself. All of those things, but if you knew my past, whatever. If you knew mine, move on from it. God didn't think about Esther's past. He doesn't think about yours, except to heal you from the hurts and to use the situations that the enemy meant for bad for good. Amen.